20 miles off the Pacific coast, the $180 million superyacht Silver Dawn drifted helplessly as both engines failed despite the efforts of elite engineers, AI diagnostics, and military-grade systems. Aboard were 25 high-profile guests, including diplomats and tech giants, facing a looming storm and total engine silence. While panic spread on deck, an 11-year-old girl genius named Layla Emerson, granddaughter of a retired mechanic, listened to the radio from a greasy garage in Port Clementine. What she heard changed everything. In the next 48 hours, this girl genius saved the yacht and stunned the maritime world by proving that instinct and heart still matter more than credentials. Before we dive in, drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe brilliance comes in all sizes, hit subscribe. Tomorrow's story will shake you even more. Let's get started. The emergency call sliced through the salty breeze like a blade Mayday. Mayday breaking the late afternoon calm over Seaglass Bay. At the coastal rescue station in Port Clementine, Captain Samuel Rourke, a weathered Coast Guard veteran with creases on his face that spoke of storms endured, snapped to attention. 20 years on the water had taught him to recognize the sound of real trouble. The voice crackling over the radio was calm, controlled, but underneath it, panic. "This is motor yacht Silver Dawn. We've lost all propulsion, 20 nautical miles off storm point. 25 passengers aboard, multiple diplomats. We are dead in the water." Samuel exchanged a look with Chief Hazel Delaney, already pulling up registration data. Her eyes widened. This wasn't just any vessel. Silver Dawn belonged to Preston Marlowe, a tech magnate whose face was plastered across magazines and stock tickers. The billionaire was hosting a Pacific trade summit aboard one of the most advanced yachts ever built. It should have been invincible. But now, with engines silent and a storm brewing offshore, 25 lives, including senators and international envoys, were drifting helplessly toward disaster. And no one knew yet that a barefoot 11-year-old girl, elbows deep in an old outboard motor, was about to change everything. 3 miles inland from the drifting yacht, in a dusty garage that smelled of grease and pine sap, Layla Emerson sat cross-legged on the floor beside her grandfather. Her hands were small, but nimble, tightening a bolt on a cracked aluminum casing like she'd done it 100 times before. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling pine trees and rattling the loose tin on the workshop roof. The storm was coming. Her grandfather, Eugene Emerson, hunched over an ancient diesel pump on the bench, his fingers steady even at 74. The radio beside them buzzed with static and Coast Guard chatter. Layla barely glanced up until she heard the name Silver Dawn. She froze. That was Preston Marlowe's yacht. She had read all about it in Popular Mechanics, where it was called a floating miracle of automation. Twin 200 horsepower engines, triple redundant computer systems, voice-activated climate control. Nothing like the old boat engines she worked on after school with Grandpa. Still, her ears perked up when she heard the words, "complete system failure, no engine response, dead drift." Layla narrowed her eyes. "That doesn't make sense," she muttered, almost to herself. "What's that?" Kiddo Gene asked, wiping oil from his hands. She turned toward the radio, tuning it slightly to clear the signal. "They're saying all the diagnostics are showing green. No faults. But the engines won't respond." Gene grunted. "Sounds like their computers are lying to them." Again, Layla chewed on her lip. "Grandpa, if the computers think everything's fine, but the engines won't even try to start, maybe it's not the software. Maybe it's something simpler. Something mechanical that the computers aren't even checking." Gene paused, letting the silence settle. "Could be. But no one listens to old mechanics anymore. These days, It's all algorithms and dashboards for the dashboards." He chuckled, a dry, dusty sound. "Still, I'd bet my lunch it's something in the fuel delivery. Or maybe air intake. Could be a blockage. Even a sensor stuck telling the computer that fuel's flowing when it ain't." Layla stood up slowly. "If I were on that boat, I'd shut off every computer and listen to the engine myself." Jean looked at her for a long moment. "You just might be the only one smart enough and gutsy enough to say that out loud." Meanwhile, out on the Pacific, tension hung thick in the air like the clouds rolling in from the west. On board the Silver Dawn, engineers in crisp white uniforms pored over tablets and monitors. Dr. Laura Kingsley, an MIT-trained propulsion specialist, was losing patience. "We've run diagnostics on every system 3 times, she snapped. "Fuel pressure, spark timing, CPU firmware, they're all reporting normal, but the engines won't turn." Preston Marlowe paced back and forth in the main salon, his frustration mounting. How can a billion-dollar yacht just die? No one had an answer. "Back in the garage." Layla stared at the radio, her heart racing. "They're looking in the wrong place." She whispered. "They keep talking about data, but they're not listening to the machine." Jean watched her with pride swelling in his chest. "You got grease in your veins, kid." Outside, a Coast Guard chopper thundered overhead, heading toward the coast. Jean turned back to his bench, but Layla wasn't done. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "I think I need to help them." Jean raised a brow. "You're 11. But I know engines. I know what they need. Fuel, air, compression, fire. Computers don't feel that. People do." He looked at her long and hard, then nodded slowly. Maybe it's time someone reminded them of that. That night, Layla lay awake listening to the wind howl through the rafters. She imagined herself aboard the drifting yacht, crawling through ducts, tapping on pipes, hearing the silence of an engine begging to be heard, not analyzed, not monitored, heard. Far out at sea, the Silver Dawn drifted closer to busy shipping lanes, a ghost ship filled with panicking guests and engineers too smart for their own good. And in a cluttered garage lit by a single flickering bulb, a girl genius began preparing to save a vessel no one else could fix. Not because she knew more, but because she understood better. By dawn, the Silver Dawn had drifted nearly 9 miles overnight. The sea was swelling now long, heavy waves rolling under the yacht like the slow breath of something ancient. The storm hadn't hit yet, but its presence could be felt in every gust of wind and the way the crew's voices grew quieter, more clipped. Captain Isabella Trent, standing on the bridge, hadn't slept. At 43, she'd navigated through hurricanes and typhoons, but nothing unnerved her like a ship that refused to speak. Engines are the heartbeat of a vessel, and hers had gone silent for too long. Down in the engine room, Dr. Kingsley and her team were on their 4th round of diagnostics. Everything still red-green. No alerts, no malfunctions, no explanation. "We've tested the control modules, the backup ignition, even reinstalled the firmware," she said, voice tight. "Nothing's working. It's like the computers think the yacht's still at anchor." Preston Marlowe had stopped pacing. Now, he simply stood by the railing, staring out at the slate-gray horizon. The ocean didn't care how many stock options you owned. "Call Caterpillar's Marine Division," he ordered flatly. "Fly in their chief engineers. I don't care what it costs." But it was already too late for more experts. Back in Port Clementine, the Coast Guard's local operations center had become a hive of quiet panic. Charts covered tables. Weather models showed the storm curling in faster than expected. The window for safe evacuation by helicopter was closing. Gene Emerson stood by the radio table, arms crossed, headset crackling in his ears. "They've tried everything but the obvious," he muttered. They're trusting systems over instincts. Beside him, Layla shifted her weight from foot to foot. She wasn't nervous, she was ready. Her backpack was stuffed with notes, diagrams, even a pocket wrench set she never left home without. "You sure about this?" Jean asked gently, glancing down at her. She met his gaze without flinching. "I know I'm just a kid, but they need someone who knows what it sounds like when an engine's trying to breathe but can't." Jean took a long breath, then turned to Commander Eliza Vaughn, the officer coordinating the marina side response. "You should let her talk to the engineering team. I know how it sounds, but you've got nothing to lose and time's running out." Eliza, a tough, composed woman with 20 years of service and a weather eye sharper than most radar, studied Layla for a moment. Then she handed her a secondary headset. "Let's see what the kid can hear." Meanwhile, on the Silver Dawn, the arrival of Caterpillar's emergency tech team brought new hope and new tension. They arrived via Coast Guard chopper, setting up an array of equipment that blinked and beeped, but once again, revealed nothing out of place. "This doesn't make any sense," said Chief Engineer Mateo Silva, poring over pressure readings. "Fuel levels are optimal, pumps are responsive, electrical continuity is solid, so why the hell won't it start?" "Because maybe the problem isn't where you're looking," came a young voice through the headset. The entire engineering team froze. "Who is this?" Kingsley asked, eyebrows raised. "My name is Layla Emerson. I'm on the line with Port Clementine Command. I've been listening to your reports, and I think your computers are lying." "Silence." "Then you're a child," Silva said bluntly. "She's also the first person to say anything that makes sense in 2 days," came Commander Vaughn's voice. "So maybe shut up and listen." Layla took a breath. "I think you've got a mechanical blockage somewhere between the tanks and the injectors. Your sensors are upstream, right before the actual fuel hits the injectors. That's why they're reading normal." Silva blinked. "That's possible." "Also," Layla added, "have you physically checked the air filters?" "Not the sensors. The filters, if they're blocked, your air sensors downstream won't know it, but your combustion won't happen." The silence this time wasn't skepticism. It was stunned realization. "Dr. Kingsley looked at Silva. "We haven't opened up the primary intake since launch. Not once. Let's check it, now." What they found changed everything. Clogged filters, gummed up fuel lines, saltwater vapor corrosion that no sensor had flagged. Within the hour, the first engine coughed, shook, and then roared to life. Everyone on board stopped what they were doing. The yacht vibrated as if waking from a long, fevered sleep. For the first time in 72 hours, Silver Dawn had a heartbeat. And it had started beating again because a barefoot girl, in a garage hundreds of miles away, had listened to the quiet. As the Silver Dawn idled in the rolling Pacific swells, one engine finally humming to life, something shifted not just in the vessel's mechanical status, but in the hearts of everyone on board. Dr. Laura Kingsley, usually the embodiment of precision and logic, stood in the engine room, staring at the spinning crankshaft like she'd just witnessed a miracle. Her pristine gloves were smudged now, her polished professionalism dulled by fatigue, frustration, and awe. She slowly pulled off her headset. Did we really just get shown up by a kid? Chief Engineer Mateo Silva, still holding a wrench in disbelief, chuckled. No. We got rescued by a kid, above deck. The storm was now within visual range, low clouds smeared across the horizon, distant thunder vibrating like a warning drum. The sea was darkening, and time was collapsing. Captain Isabella Trent emerged from the bridge with a mug of coffee gone cold in her hand. Status: 1 engine's running, Mateo reported. The port side's still silent, but we've identified compression irregularities in cylinder 6. Too low to ignite. Captain Trent didn't flinch. Options. We'd need to disassemble half the engine to get in there. It'll take a daytime we don't have. Silence. Then a voice crackled through the comms. It was Jean Emerson again. Calm and clear. You don't need to fix the cylinder. You just need to work around it. Captain Trent frowned. Come again? You're running a 6-cylinder block. One's dead. Disconnect that one from the combustion cycle, shut off its fuel line and exhaust valve. Run the engine on 5 cylinders. That'll throw the balance, Kingsley said automatically. Not if you ease into it. Won't be pretty, but it'll move. There was hesitation. Then, surprisingly, Kingsley spoke up. He's right. If we keep waiting for a perfect fix, we're going to miss the only chance we have. Captain Trent looked around at her crew, at the delegation guests now gathering in the lounge. Some pale, some angry, some whispering frantically in other languages. I've sailed through hurricanes with half a sail and prayer, she muttered. Let's make it 5 cylinders and 1 genius kid. Back at the Port Clementine Command Center, Layla sat beside her grandfather, eyes glued to the screens tracking the yacht's position. Her hands fidgeted with a socket wrench the way other kids might twist a lock of hair. Commander Vaughn approached, crouching beside her. You're changing minds out there. Layla. She looked up, blinking. I just told them what Grandpa taught me. Vaughn smiled. That's the part they don't teach at MIT. From the monitors, radio chatter returned. We've bypassed cylinder 6, Kingsley reported. Modified the injection sequence. Pressure's stable. We're attempting startup now. Layla leaned in close, eyes shut, visualizing the mechanical rhythm. Then, the rumble came through the speakers like a roar of defiance. The second engine coughed, stumbled, then caught. The rhythm wasn't smooth, but it was alive. Both engines operational. Mateo breathed. We're back. Captain Trent's voice came through next, steel and steadiness layered with relief. This is Silver Dawn. We are regaining control. Adjusting heading for Port Clementine. ETA 90 minutes. Cheers erupted at the command center. People who hadn't spoken for hours clapped and high-fived. Vaughn exhaled sharply, then looked down at Layla. You just saved 25 lives. Layla smiled. I just listened. The engine told me everything. On board the Silver Dawn, a profound shift was happening. The VIP passengers, senators, diplomats, tech billionaires who once moved with arrogance now watched the engineers with a newfound respect. Aboard this palace of technology, it wasn't wealth, education, or power that had solved the crisis. It was understanding. Preston Marlowe stood at the helm beside Captain Trent. Silent. His yacht had been built to showcase dominance and luxury. It had been saved by a girl who fixed lawnmowers after school. She saw what none of us could, he said quietly. Trent glanced over. That's because she wasn't distracted by all the blinking lights. He nodded slowly. I want to meet her. You will. But even if he didn't, Layla Emerson had already left her mark. That night, as the Silver Dawn sliced through choppy seas under its own power, 2 diesel engines thundering with stubborn pride. A child's voice half a continent away drifted off to sleep with grease under her nails, a wrench on her nightstand, and a storm behind her. And no one would ever look at just a kid the same way again? It was nearly dusk when the Silver Dawn slid into the outer edge of Port Clementine's harbor, her white hull streaked with salt spray and storm water. The sea still heaved with leftover swells, but both engines rumbled confidently, one slightly uneven, but stubbornly alive. On shore, a crowd had gathered. Not the curious, but the grateful. Camera crews, Coast Guard officers, local families with hands over their hearts. Even the mayor had shown up in rain boots and a windbreaker. But everyone's eyes were scanning the marina, not for the yacht's glittering guests. They were looking for the little girl who'd saved them. Layla Emerson, still in her oil-smudged jeans and worn sneakers, stood next to her grandfather, shoulders back, eyes wide. She wasn't sure what to expect. She never liked being in front of crowds. Engines didn't ask for interviews. Then the gangway dropped. Preston Marlowe was the first down, his $1 million watch drenched and forgotten. His tailored shirt stuck to him like wet tissue. But his face, usually controlled and confident, was open, vulnerable. He walked straight toward Layla, stopped 3 feet in front of her. And then he crouched. Eye to eye. "You didn't just save my yacht," he said, voice thick. "You saved 25 people, some of the most powerful ones on Earth, and not a single one of them knew how to turn a wrench." Layla blinked. "I just listened to what the engine wasn't saying." Preston smiled. "You didn't listen to machines. You listened beyond them. That's the difference." Behind him, the ship's crew applauded. Even the engineers who had once dismissed her, who held degrees from Ivy League schools and worked on military-grade propulsion systems, nodded in reverence. Not to her fame, to her instincts. Then Preston stood, turned to the press, and declared with no trace of irony, "This girl is the future of engineering." "Flashbulbs exploded?" Layla looked sideways at her grandfather, suddenly unsure. "Jean just winked. I always said you were smarter than the software." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Interviews, TV appearances, a personal invitation from the National Institute of Marine Engineering, a scholarship offer from a prestigious tech academy that had never accepted anyone under 16 but made an exception for her. Layla didn't know what to do with all the attention. She still preferred the quiet hum of an engine over microphones and stage lights. But when someone from the U.S. Naval Research Lab asked if she'd be interested in helping them test engine prototypes unofficially, of course she lit up. Jean watched from the back of every room, sometimes with pride, sometimes with disbelief. Always with a tear tucked in the corner of one eye he refused to acknowledge. One evening, as they closed up the garage together, he handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I've been saving," he said, rubbing his knuckles. "Your grandma and I were going to use it to visit the Grand Canyon, but I think you found a canyon of your own." Inside was a check, more than enough to cover a summer program at a university she'd once only dreamed of touring. "Grandpa, I can't take this." "You already earned it. All I did was hand it over." She flung her arms around him, wrench in one hand, grease still on her cheek. "Think of it this way," he added. "That check was going to take me to look at rocks. You're going to help build the machines that move the Earth." Back in the city, Preston Marlowe had called an emergency board meeting, not about stock prices or quarterly margins, but about rebuilding the educational pipeline, rethinking how talent was found, nurtured, and honored. "We've built an empire of technology," he said, addressing shareholders. "But we forgot the soul of it, the human hands, the real ears, the kids who don't wait for credentials to solve problems. I met one of those kids." He paused, and she made our AI systems look like fools. And across America, a video went viral, a little girl in grease-stained jeans showing a team of adult engineers where to find the manual fuel valve on a yacht worth $180 million. It ended with her saying, in a soft, steady voice, "Machines don't lie, but sometimes they don't tell the whole truth either. That's what people are for." The world hadn't just been saved by a girl genius. It had been reminded why we still need them. Summer faded into fall in the small coastal town of Port Clementine, but Layla Emerson's life hadn't slowed one bit. Every day after school, she'd still go to the garage, still roll up her sleeves and help Grandpa fix stubborn outboards, rusty gearboxes, and the occasional ancient lawnmower. But now, she did it with the quiet knowledge that the world knew her name. People stopped her on the street now. Reporters emailed daily. Letters arrived in stacks, some from other kids her age, asking how to become engineers. Others from old mechanics saying she'd restored their faith. Some were from CEOs and professors, trying to explain why they hadn't thought of what she saw in seconds. Layla read them all, but none of it changed who she was. She still wore her same torn jeans and navy blue hoodie, still tied her hair back with a rubber band from the garage drawer, still preferred socket wrenches over selfies. But something inside her had shifted. She was no longer fixing engines to prove she could. She was fixing them because she understood them. Machines had always made sense. But now, she realized, so did people. The crew of the Silver Dawn, those engineers with all their degrees and titles, they weren't dumb. They were just trained to trust what they could see on a screen, not what they could feel in their bones. That had been her advantage all along, feeling what the engine felt, listening between the sounds. One chilly Saturday, she was in the garage with Jean when Commander Eliza Vaughn pulled up in a navy blue SUV. She stepped out, holding a file tucked under her arm. Jean raised an eyebrow. "Uh-oh. You in trouble again?" Layla grinned. "Not yet." Commander Vaughn handed her the file. Inside was a proposal, an official one, a national mentorship program Layla's garage sponsored by the Department of Education and co-funded by Marlowe Technologies. The plan convert underused shop classes across the country into real, working mechanical labs. Pair retired tradesmen like Jean with young girls and boys who didn't fit in traditional classrooms. Make space for the kids who were born to build. Layla blinked. They want me to be part of this. "No," Commander Vaughn smiled. "They want you to lead it." Jean gave a low whistle. "Looks like you're gonna need a bigger toolbox." A few weeks later, Layla stood on stage at a conference in San Francisco. Not a tech summit, not a military seminar. It was a gathering of public school teachers. She wore her usual hoodie and boots, now cleaned up just enough for the occasion. The room was full of educators looking for hope, something to believe in after years of budget cuts and exhausted classrooms. Layla stepped up to the mic and cleared her throat. Her voice was soft at first, but steady. "I'm not here because I'm a genius," she began. "I'm here because my grandpa let me break things, because he made me listen to machines, not just about them. I didn't learn in a lab. I learned on the floor of a garage that smelled like old gas and coffee." She paused. Engines don't care what grades you get, or what your report card says. They care if you understand them. And there are kids out there, millions of them, who understand machines better than they understand math class. Maybe we should start listening to them too. When she stepped down, the crowd stood. Teachers wiping tears, principals taking notes, reporters snapping pictures of a girl who reminded them why they taught in the first place. Later that night, she sat alone at the edge of her hotel bed, feet dangling, hands still fiddling with a broken wind-up clock she'd found at a flea market. Her phone buzzed. It was a video message from Captain Isabella Trent. The Silver Dawn had been fully repaired, both engines restored. But they'd left one thing untouched, the red manual valve that Jordan, the young deckhand, had pried open during the storm. They framed it in a glass case with a brass plate underneath. "In honor of Layla Emerson, the reason this ship still moves." Layla smiled, wiping her cheek with her sleeve. The engine always speaks. She had just helped the world learn how to listen again. And now, she was just getting started. The sky above Port Clementine shimmered in lavender and gold as the sun dipped behind the marina. On the dock, Layla Emerson sat with her legs dangling over the edge, her worn-out sneakers swaying gently above the water. She was quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because for the first time in a long time, the world had listened, truly listened, and that was enough. Behind her, the soft clang of tools echoed from the garage where Gene Emerson still tinkered even after sunset, swearing under his breath about modern carburetors made by people who never held a wrench. It was home. It always would be. A soft knock of shoes on wood made Layla turn. Preston Marlowe, dressed in a simple windbreaker this time, not a tailored suit, walked toward her carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. One had her name written on it in black marker. The other just said, "Wrencher." She smiled. "You didn't have to come all the way back?" "I didn't," he replied, handing her the cup. "I wanted to." They sat in silence for a minute, watching the harbor lights blink on one by one. "You know," he said finally, "I spent most of my life thinking the smartest people in the room wore badges or carried degrees. People who used the right terminology, who built simulations." Layla didn't respond, just sipped her cocoa. "But out there, on that boat, I realized I didn't need another algorithm. I needed someone who knew what fuel smells like when it leaks, who hears the difference between a click and a clunk." He looked at her. "I needed you." She met his eyes and shrugged. "I'm just a girl with a toolbox." "No," Preston said firmly. "You're a bridge." She blinked. "A bridge?" He nodded. Between old wisdom and new thinking. Between machines and the people who've forgotten how to trust them. Between kids like you and institutions that wouldn't look twice unless you carried a resume longer than your arm. Layla looked back out at the water. The reflection of the moon rippled over a calm tide. "I just never wanted to be famous. I wanted to fix things." Preston smiled. "And you did? You fixed an engine? You fixed a yacht? But more than that, you fixed our perspective?" She looked at him now. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't just see a billionaire. She saw a man who'd been humbled by silence, by failure, and by the girl who brought power back to his empire, not with code, but with common sense. That week, the Silver Dawn returned to the harbor. Fully operational, quietly majestic. It didn't need to prove itself anymore. Inside the main salon, a permanent display had been installed, a hand-painted mural showing Layla crouched beside an engine, headphones slung around her neck, grease on her cheek, and a quiet smile on her face. Above it read, "The heartbeat returns, in honor of the hands that heard it." Layla had insisted it include Gene, too, because the hands that taught me mattered just as much. That evening, during the mural unveiling, Captain Isabella Trent gave a short speech. "We put all our faith in systems, in electronics, in things that were supposed to be smarter than us. And they failed." She looked directly at Layla, who stood quietly with a small group of local kids, half of them still in school uniforms. But then came a girl who didn't need credentials, only courage. She reminded us that wisdom isn't outdated, that listening to the world, not just scanning it, still matters. The applause was thunderous. Weeks passed. The news faded. The headlines moved on. But not Layla. In a converted school bus turned traveling workshop, she and Gene began touring small towns across the country, teaching kids how to listen to machines, how to understand them. The first stop, a school in Nevada where a girl named Ava had once been suspended for taking apart the janitor's leaf blower without permission. Layla handed her a screwdriver. "No permission needed," she said. "Let's break something and fix it better." And every so often, back home in Port Clementine, when the wind carried just right over the water, the sound of a distant diesel engine would echo across the bay. Layla would look up, smile softly, and whisper, "I hear you." Anyone can learn to listen if they're quiet enough to hear what others miss. As the harbor lights flickered to life in Port Clementine, Layla Emerson flipped open the grease-stained notebook she'd carried since the day she learned to hold a wrench. But this time, it wasn't to draw engine diagrams or jot down torque settings. This time, she was sketching something bigger, a blueprint for a program that would give other kids the same chance she almost never got. Kids who were told they were too young, too messy, too different. Kids who didn't speak the language of textbooks, but understood the rhythm of machines. She knew now the garage wasn't just hers. It belonged to every girl who fixed things in secret, every boy who took apart radios under the covers, every kid who didn't raise their hand in class but could bring an engine back to life with feel and instinct alone. The nobody who saved $1 billion yacht had become the mentor who would tune the world one spark plug at a time. Because for Layla, and for those she'd inspire, the future wasn't automated. It was human. And it was just getting started. The end. Up next, 2 more stories that will move your heart. Click to keep listening, and if you believe in second chances, don't forget to hit subscribe.